You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations.
Thanks for joining us again on Encore for the last look at Between Black and Blue, complexity within the Black law enforcement community. In part 3, our panelists answer questions from attendees and share their final thoughts to conclude the Between Black and Blue program. Thank you for following along with this series that is one of our many Black History Month programs from the National Law Enforcement Museum. If you are listening to this episode on or before February 22nd of 2023, there is still time to register for our next live program, Voices for Change, Excellence in Black Law Enforcement Media. This program is streaming live on Zoom on Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023 from 6 to 7:30 p.m. The broadcast of the program will be recorded, and in the days after the program, it will be published on the museum's YouTube channel, which is the NLEOMF. But now, let's return to 2021 for the conclusion of Between Black and Blue, complexity within the Black law enforcement community.
So we're going to go to our questions. And the first question, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but training for a small agency. Now, we have a lot of situations where we call the Karen effect, where white people then call the police on Black people doing normal things. You know, we got Poolside Patty and Barbecue Becky and the woman in Central Park that called the police on the guy that was looking at birds. So here's the question. How do we safely respond to calls for service when the person is doing nothing wrong and is angry and combative when the police are called? We want to train our officers to respond appropriately and create community in service so we can explain our responses. But how do we work together to prevent arrests and misunderstandings in the community?
Yeah, I'll respond real quick to that. I think that some of this starts at your dispatch level and ensuring that your dispatchers are also properly trained, because in a lot of those instances with those situations that you had described, there was some sort of a bias that was placed on that dispatcher that then communicated that bias to that officer who's responding, who then made a predetermined notion about how they were going to choose to respond to the incident. So I think that that's where you're looking at some of the different aspects of your bias training and how you actually conduct that. And are you including your dispatchers in that training so that way they are not vicariously pushing a bias onto an officer who then now has it in that mindset. The officer has to be able to make that determination, that discernment when they get there. But I think that's sometimes one of the important aspects that's missing is that you don't include some of your civilian staff in the training as well. And one of the things that we're currently doing is we're also sending our dispatchers through de-escalation training that's specialized for dispatch, just so that we have that clear understanding of what that expectation should be and how they should be conveying that message.
Chief Finley, how do we police the Karens of the world and convince the people of color that the police are calling on them? How do we build that relationship?
That is a kind of a part two, and you handle the call initially, and then we got to do a follow up and have more conversation, because as Chief Glover indicated, is that we just got to take the time and really discern that particular call. And so the Karens of the wall, those individuals that may be a little off the rocker, we just got to kind of try to have a normal conversation with them. But it's going to be very difficult at that point in time to reason with them. So we just got to have to do a wraparound and another follow-up with them just to clear the call that particular day. But we got to figure a way to, how do we do a follow-up on that so they can have some understanding? Because you got two polar opposite. You're not gonna make a determination. You're not gonna change their mind at that point in time. Just kind of let them know that it's not a crime, and then I get back with you later. I know I didn't handle that call, but
no. The next question, I'm going to start with Sheriff Brown. The next question comes from Eric. He's a 26-year Black law enforcement officer, and he's asking a real heartfelt question. How can someone get a dialogue started about Black law enforcement among their coworkers, especially with the climate going on in the country right now?
I think you just have to have the courage to do so. You just have to be the one who's unafraid to step up and initiate that conversation within your agency. Not to say that it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. And let me share a quick story with you. As the only African-American officer at a small agency prior to coming to Dallas County many years ago, I was a sergeant, and I was a young sergeant when the call came out for a suspicious person. And the only thing that could be articulated in the call was that the person, it was a Black guy, and he was in a neighborhood, and the person who was calling hadn't seen that person in their neighborhood. And so they called on this young person. Well, as a young sergeant, I'm trying to make good choices and good decisions and trying to make good decisions concerning the minority community. And so when the call came out, I had to find the courage within myself, within my law enforcement agency. I'm the new rookie sergeant, but I had to find the courage to say, get on the radio and say, okay, can you have the caller articulate what it is that the person is doing? That's what's suspicious. The activity is what is suspicious, not the person. So please ask the caller, what is the person doing? And before I knew it, that became the norm for our agency on calls that previously would have just been responded to with no questions asked. The caller says, there's a suspicious person in my neighborhood. Why are they suspicious? What are they doing? You have to have the courage, and you have to just start that conversation within your agency. You have to be the one to do it. You can't stand by and wait for somebody else to do it. You have to make the decision to do it. That's why you were placed there. That's why you were called to whatever agency you are working, serving in. That's why you were called there, because it's your turn. It's your time to have the courage to initiate the conversation there at your agency.
All right. The next few questions I'm going to ask kind of in rapid fire. I'll assign it to one person. If somebody else wants to chime in before I move forward, feel free. There's a lot of people asking questions about recruitment. Lori, Darren, several other people are asking, what are the best practices for recruitment and retention of underrepresented people in law enforcement? Chief Glover.
Yeah, so recruitment in law enforcement, that's always going to be difficult, especially in these days and times. So you have to be very creative, and you have to, just try and figure out, the different ways of how you can reach the population and the people that you want to reach in order for them to come into the profession. And there's an onboarding to that. And I'll get into that. But one of the things that we started doing is we started working with a marketing company that was able to, pinpoint, the individuals that we wanted to actually come to the table. So we wanted more females, we wanted more African Americans to come to the table. We started working the whole Google Analytics and being able to, pinpoint who is actually paying attention to Arizona law enforcement. So that way we can try and capture those people and send the recruitment brochures out to them and make sure that, just like when you go on shopping on Amazon and you look for those pair of shoes or Macy's or whatever, and you have that pop up on the side of your screen when you're scrolling through you're on the internet on the web browser. Well, we want the Tempe Police Department popping up every time that you go scrolling through, looking at something for law enforcement. And so that, we had to try and get a little bit creative in how we approach that. But the other side of that is that retention part. That's tough, especially at this moment in time. And so one of the things that I did, coming into the department is I'm looking at the environment. I had to take a hard look at, the agency that I grew up in, and I'm looking at all the, photos on the walls and everything. And I'm having a Spike Lee moment because I'm like, there's no brothers on the wall. None. None whatsoever, because, not until 1979 did we not have our first Black police officer that was hired on, and they had all these historic photos. And so now what we're doing is we're going through and we're trying to make it more inclusive, because the only photos that were on the wall were white people. And that plays a significant psychological, effect on the people that are working there. If you want people to be comfortable and you want to set that tone, that environment, then you have to make those changes. And so having a strong mentorship program and the onboarding of people, making sure that they're getting the training, the mentoring, they're having that go-to person, that's important, as well as their mental health and having a good, strong peer support team. That is another piece too. And if you want to keep people, you got to keep them sane, and that's an important part.
On the recruiting, since COVID hit, we was really identifying a lot of HBCUs, and in the South, the southern part of the United States was really targeting the Mississippi, the Louisiana, and part of Georgia, just to go out to those hard-hit areas as well, and just to kind of incentivize anything that we can bring to the table. The retention part is always going to be a challenge with a lot of competing agencies throughout this part of the country. And that's a challenge for us, because a couple dollars or a take-home car or whatever the case may be, a lot of officers will take advantage of that and leave. So it's going to be a challenge, but I like what Chief Glover said, as far as you got to put peer support in everything that you do. You got to show your officers that you love them, and that you got to continue to give them that support, lunch and learn, or whatever you can do to bring to them to the table to have that conversation. And on that last question with Sheriff Brown, I wanted to jump in. She's absolutely right. You got to take the lead. And every 6 weeks, I have a tough conversation with my officers. Whatever you want to talk about, let's have that discussion. If it's Black issues, if it's white issues, whatever those issues are, you got to put yourself in that position to have honest conversation with your folks.
Mr. Williams, you must be facing that at Verizon as well. Are there synergies that policing and law enforcement can borrow from the private sector?
Most certainly. So from a recruitment perspective, I will just say that we are, again, very much at the HBCUs. We have internship programs that exist. And that program starts around November. At least the process of the internship starts in November. There may still be opportunities though. So if there are ideas, or if there are different partnerships for recruitment programs out there that you'd like us to take a look at, please email me. I have been addressing some requests for public-private partnership points of contacts, one in Arizona and several others. So I'll put my information there. Please reach out. Happy to connect you from a recruitment perspective. I'll certainly make introductions if needed. In addition to that, different public-private partnership, programs or that people have put in the chat box there. Happy to make those introductions as well. So I'll indicate my information, and happy to step in.
A good place to start is, in fact, with HBCUs. When I was at Fayetteville State University, we were embedded with Fayetteville Police. Chief Hawkins down in Fayetteville doing great work. When I was at UMES, I tried to explain to a lot of the kids from DC and Baltimore that were anti-police that go in, if you don't like what they're doing, go and be part of the change. Be the positive change that you want to make. The next question comes from Brian. And it's a good question. It starts with Pillar 1 from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And as we know, Pillar 1 is building trust and nurturing legitimacy. We know that's the foundational principle in the relationship between the police and the community. But the question is, how do you, as Black officers, Black commanders, Black command staff, how do you navigate the challenges of both internal legitimacy within your department, but also external legitimacy in your community? How'd you address it? How'd you overcome it? Chief Glover?
Yeah, so part of that is that procedural justice piece where you're giving that community a voice, where you also have to give your internal staff a voice as well. They have to be completely on board, and you have to get their buy-in. And the hard thing is sometimes sitting there having those hard conversations, but you have to actually be an active listener. You have to listen to what they have to say as well, because they have, they're going to have their opinions, they're going to have their concerns, but you have to be able to, be that leader and stand up and be able to, have the deep dive, hard conversation with your staff in order to make sure that they understand that they're being supported. But at the same time, it's re-engaging them with that philosophy of customer service and understanding that we are doing this because the community allows for us to do this. They give us the authority to go out there and police our own community. And so that's something that they have to remember. And so once you engage them in that, it sort of starts to take care of itself in terms of them, wrapping their mind around it and understanding it. One of the things that I have recently done here is something that I've seen done in many corporations, is created an employee advisory group. We had this public safety task force, and I have a chief's advisory board that's being formed. Well, it was just as important to make sure that the employees had their own advisory board, so that way they can speak directly to me. It's not a situation of playing the telephone game. By the time it gets to me, information that it's all polished over or whatever, or it never gets to me at all. I want to have direct contact, and they respect that. And I think that's the big thing, is being able to have that open line of communication where they feel comfortable enough to have real dialogue with the chief, and know that hey, you're being supported, and what you say to me is not a situation where you're going to be disciplined or something of that nature because you don't agree with a particular philosophy. We can agree to disagree, but you're still going to do your job.
Chief Finley?
Yeah, Doc, on that too, I think that Chief was spot on. And what I look at is go back to that policy. You got to follow policy. You got to treat your citizens with respect. The police department and my command staff and supervisory staff, they got to do relentless follow-up on those calls that we get, those complaints that we get. We got to investigate them. We got to make a determination of what took place. And again, part of that relentless follow-up is get back and have that conversation with those individuals. And what's important with that first pillar is about trust. And so you got to have that, regardless of that conversation and how hard it is, you got to have that understanding. At the end of the day, we can have a balance and a difference of opinion, but at least they understand where you're coming from, that you're following the guidelines of what we govern constitutionally. And I think that's fine. As long as we have that open conversation and we're listening and we're giving them a professional response, and that we're making those subtle changes that we have to make in those communities and open our hearts and our minds and heart, I think that's a start in the right direction.
We're getting close to the end. Let me throw out a couple of more questions. Dave asks a great question about public relations. Typically, the police are in the news because of use of force. And then whoever the people are, they'll hire attorneys. But the typical response from the police is either no comment or limited comment. We can't talk. There's an investigation going on. But for recruitment purposes, the police don't get their side of the story out there. So how do you deal with that in recruiting? How do you deal with the public relations problem? Chief Glover?
So from a public relations standpoint, we're horrible at telling our own story. Let's be honest. I mean, we really could do a much better job, but I think that, that's where, you look at it in face value. We are police, we're not geared towards at times telling our story in a way that, is that's going to be, I guess in a way that really is going to reach out and touch people that the way it needs to. And sometimes I think that's a struggle, and that's, you have to ensure that, you're conveying your message and that you're telling your story, that narrative is coming across correctly. Because you can guide that narrative and the story and tell the story the way that it needs to be told and keep it factual, whether good, bad, or indifferent. but it's the way in how we do it and how we present that. And sometimes it's lacking. And I think that that's something that we're always struggling with, and until you get like really good people in place that manages that, like, we've been, looking at that ourselves, just, how do we improve in that area? And do we go out and we get a company that helps us to do that? Or is it just, better training with our media relations group? I think that's sort of always going to be one of those situations where we're always going to be looking for the proper answer and finding that balance, because at one point in time, I felt that we were really spot on being able to do that, but it's also very easy to shift back and revert back to the no comment and circle the wagons, and we're not really giving the public the information they need.
So
Excellent.
Doc, real quick on that, and again, that social media piece, get that first bite of the apple, give them the facts. Don't be afraid to give out that information. And I think that law enforcement for a while has been reluctant. It is what it is. Social media will beat us up. And so you put that piece out, and then you talk with the media one-on-one. You just have that discussion. Again, you're not going to give them the whole playbook, but you got to tell them what you're doing based on the factual things that we as law enforcement encounter.
Social media is an asset that we should be using more often. So I'm going to throw out this last question. All four panelists will get a chance to answer this, but I just want to again remind people that are watching, this is brought to us by the National Law Enforcement Museum. So jump into the chat, get the information, feel free to make a donation to the museum, and that'll help us continue these conversations. And a big thank you to my people at Noble that joined in and partnered with this. So the next question, we've talked about diversity and spent a lot of time talking about race and ethnicity. Now I want to jump over to gender diversity, because Chris asked a great question, because a lot of studies show that when we increase the amount of females into policing, the use of force reports decrease, the abuse of force reports decrease, and when we control for time on the job and rank, female officers still make the same amount of arrests but have fewer complaints. So, Sheriff Brown, how do we start off by getting more females into law enforcement?
Well, I think that you have examples such as myself and Sheriff Maddox get before our communities and remind our communities that we were once little girls who grew up in a community, and this is where we are now, and that if that's something that we can do, then certainly they can do it too. One of the things that we're doing is we're going to start a track here with one of our local high schools and try to gear folks toward law enforcement. In particular, I mean, we're male and female, but in particular, we're seeking those young ladies who have an interest in law enforcement. I have over 1,300 detention service officers, and the vast majority of those officers are females. They are women. And so we try to put those people out in front of the community so that the community sees that these are females from this very community who are able to do these jobs. And we encourage them. We just want them to be able to do the job. And we want to encourage them that if we can do it, they can do it too. And you're right. You're right. I'm more apt to talk my way out of a situation before I have to get into a hand-to-hand combat with somebody. And we know that to be true across the board. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's great if we can get law enforcement to be inclusive of not only people of color, but gender-wise as well. If you can do the job, we invite you to come on.
Rapid fire answers, 30 seconds or less. Chief Glover, how do we get more females in law enforcement?
I think Sheriff Brown just basically put it out there and explained it and did a great job. I mean, when you look at it in terms of the communication style that people have when they're out there in the field, better job at de-escalating. They naturally do that, and so we're trying to do is we are always actively trying to recruit for more female officers, partly because of that, and as we talked about inclusion, and I talked about it earlier in one of the questions, is that inclusiveness, it means that we bring more females to the table because we need their perspective.
Chief Finley, 30 seconds or less. How do we get more females?
Well, we don't have that issue. We just graduated class 18. About 12 of them were females, and we hire a lot of females. And the thing that I will tell you is that we talk about retention, they stay. And so whatever we're doing, maybe it's my good looks, I don't know. Whatever we're doing, we got to keep it up because they are good employees. And like Sheriff Brown said earlier, is that they are good talkers and they know how to de-escalate situations a lot quicker than their counterparts. So it's part of that training as well.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, you get the last word on this. How do we recruit more females?
Well, I'll tell you, Verizon places a significant amount of emphasis in this area. We have a program called the Women of the World, in which we are targeting increasing our women in leadership by up to 35% or more in the next 3 to 5 years. We started this 7 years ago, and we are well ahead of the goal. So there's a lot of effort there. We believe that obviously how we reflect in the community, both the constituency as well as law enforcement, will help to improve and help obviously the effort that each of the leaders here on this panel have discussed.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, Sheriff Brown, Chief Glover, Chief Finley, Sheriff Maddox. Mr. Williams, thank you so much. Big thanks to President Linda Williams and Dwayne Crawford, and a huge thank you for hosting us. National Law Enforcement Museum, thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this special revisit of Between Black and Blue, Complexity Within the Black Law Enforcement Community, where we heard from some key figures in the law enforcement community to discuss communities of color and how their relationship with law enforcement can be better served and supported. For more information on this program, follow the link in the episode description. And many thanks to you for listening to this episode of Encore, a show from Precinct 444, the podcast network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. We hope that you learned something from this episode of Encore and will continue to join us again for future revisits of past museum programs and conversations.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.